She slides a worn folder across the table, her gaze fixed on some distant point, refusing to meet my eyes. "They shouldn't exist anymore," she murmured, her voice a mere breath. "They requested all copies be destroyed during the investigation, but I kept one. I've been waiting, hoping someone would finally ask the right questions." Inside lay the original whistleblower statement from Dr. Clara Mason, detailing horrific experimental treatments inflicted upon female patients labeled with defiant personality disorder or hysterical tendencies. Women who dared to question authority, who simply refused to comply. These treatments, designed to crush their spirits and force them into docile acceptance of established hierarchies, sent a chill down my spine. Back in my cramped room at Pinewood Apartments, I unfolded one of Mr. Henderson's donation envelopes from the esteemed Hope Foundation. The return address, stark in blue ink, felt like a pointed accusation. The very same logo adorned my mother's commitment papers, alongside the chillingly familiar signature of Mr. Henderson Collins, authorizing the seemingly endless financial arrangements for Dr. Clara Mason's therapeutic residency. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. 3 days later, Mrs. Gable found me hunched over dusty tomes in the library basement. Her arthritic hands, gnarled like ancient roots, twisted nervously in her lap. "They're not in the system," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the stairwell as if expecting unseen watchers. "When Stonemeyer shut down, some patients were relocated. Special cases, not in any public database." With a trembling hand, she slid a hand-drawn map across the table. A treacherous, winding road snaking through dense woodland, leading to an ominously unmarked turnoff, and finally, a facility named Rock Creek Behavioral Center. "Security badge only," she added, her voice barely audible. "Minimal staff, maximum containment." A shiver traced its way down my spine. That night, fueled by a desperate hope and a gnawing fear, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic along the unmarked access road. Tree branches clawed at the windows like skeletal warning fingers. After what felt like an eternity of 3 miles shrouded in dense, isolating woods, the facility loomed into view. A sprawling, foreboding stone structure, with narrow, prison-like windows and a chain-link perimeter crowned with razor wire. A solitary guard booth stood sentinel at the entrance, and a small, discreet sign identified it as Rock Creek Behavioral Center, private property, no trespassing. Was she in there? Had she been trapped within those cold stone walls all these years, a mere 2 hours from the house where I grew up, a place filled with hollow memories? I parked on the shoulder, a quarter of a mile away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Through my binoculars, I studied the building with a growing sense of dread. Cameras, like unblinking eyes, were positioned at every corner. The staff parking lot held only about 20 cars. A loading dock sat still, where a pharmacy delivery truck had likely unloaded its grim cargo of unmarked containers. This wasn't a place designed for healing. It was a fortress built for containment. My mother was behind those walls. I felt it in the deepest recesses of my being. The question wasn't if I would get her out. The question was how far I would descend into the darkness to dismantle the system that had swallowed her whole, and the people who had built their comfortable lives on her agonizing silence, starting with the man I had called Dad for 17 long years. The cheap bathroom mirror in my dingy hostel room reflected a stranger staring back at me. Chestnut hair dye stained the chipped porcelain sink like a gruesome reminder of my transformation. I practiced my carefully constructed cover story under my breath, my gloved hands massaging the dark color into my scalp. Angela Weber, social work student, thesis on long-term care environments. The words felt foreign and stiff on my tongue, despite 2 weeks of relentless rehearsal. My forged student ID and visitor application lay on the sticky countertop beside a spiral notebook filled with unnecessarily detailed research questions, a deliberate attempt to appear innocuous. People rarely questioned those who seemed official and, frankly, boring. The 40-minute drive to Rock Creek on those winding back roads felt like a descent into the abyss. The facility finally emerged from the oppressive woodland. A sprawling brick structure with narrow windows and a rusted iron gate that seemed less an entrance and more a barrier designed to keep the forgotten in. My pulse hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I approached the visitor entrance, but I plastered a mask of detached professionalism onto my face. The receptionist, a woman with hollow eyes that seemed to have witnessed too much, barely glanced at my credentials, her gaze scanning my forged documents with a chillingly mechanical indifference. "Purpose of visit?" she asked, her voice as flat and lifeless as stale soda. "Research interview with patient Camille Mercer for my thesis on institutional care environments." With a steady hand that belied the tremor in my soul, I handed her the official-looking approval letter I had painstakingly created, complete with convincingly forged signatures. She stamped a visitor pass with a dull thud and buzzed me through the heavy door without a second glance. The antiseptic smell hit me first, a harsh, sterile blend of bleach and industrial cleaner, doing its best to mask something far more sinister lurking beneath. The soft, shuffling echo of feet drifted down the corridor in a steady, unsettling rhythm as patients moved between their scheduled activities, flanked by emotionless attendants clutching clipboard charts. The visiting area was a bleak space, dotted with scattered tables bolted to the floor, each separated just enough to prevent any semblance of private conversation. A hulking guard stood by the only exit, the jangling of keys on his belt a constant low-level threat. And then I saw her. My mother sat by the window, her frail hands folded delicately in her lap. Wispy strands of graying hair were pulled back in a loose, pathetic knot. Weak sunlight filtered through the wire-reinforced glass, illuminating motes of dust that danced around her like tiny, lost souls. Her vacant gaze followed nothing in particular, lost in some internal landscape I couldn't comprehend. My carefully researched notes hadn't prepared me for how utterly small she looked, how fragile. I approached slowly, my footsteps feeling thunderous in the oppressive silence, and deliberately placed my notebook on the table with what I hoped appeared to be academic calm. "Dr. Mercer, I'm Angela Weber. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Her eyes didn't focus immediately, and a sickening realization washed over me. The medication. They kept her perpetually adrift, somewhere between reality and a drug-induced haze. I sat down across from her, acutely aware of the guard's watchful presence, his periodic glances at his watch, a stark reminder that time was a precious commodity here. According to the schedule I had memorized, medication rounds happened at 10 o'clock a.m. and 2 o'clock p.m. It was currently 11:30 a.m., a fleeting window when some patients experienced a brief, fragile clarity. "I'm researching long-term care environments," I continued, my voice deliberately loud enough for any eavesdroppers, then leaning forward slightly, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, a desperate plea escaping my lips. "Mom, my name is Maya." Her eyes sharpened suddenly, the pupils contracting as if a veil had been lifted. Her frail fingers trembled as they reached toward my face, stopping just inches short of contact, as if an invisible barrier still held her captive. "They said you would forget me," she whispered, her voice raspy and rough from disuse, each word a painful testament to her isolation. "That you'd be safer that way." The simple act of recognition, that flicker of awareness in her eyes, splintered something in my chest. 16 years of forced separation dissolved by 5 quiet, heart-wrenching words. "I remember enough," I answered, my own voice thick with unshed tears, opening my notebook as a flimsy shield against the guard's ever-present gaze. Camille's gaze darted nervously towards the guard, then back to me, a silent plea in her eyes. "We have 20 minutes before Lawrence makes his rounds. He thinks I'm responding well to the new dosage." I nodded, forcing my expression to remain neutral despite the storm of emotions raging behind my ribs. "Tell me what happened," I urged, my voice tight with anticipation and dread. "Behavioral conditioning experiments at Stonemer Meyer," she murmured, her face settling into the placid, almost vacant mask of someone long institutionalized. "Hale, they called them breakthrough treatments for treatment-resistant patients." Her voice, though weak, held a chilling undercurrent as she described the mental tortures disguised as therapy: sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, experimental drugs administered without consent, the calculated selection of difficult women, single mothers, former addicts, abuse survivors whose complaints would be conveniently dismissed. I was department head of psychiatry. I found the files, patient suicides classified as treatment failures. Her words tumbled out faster now, a torrent of truth breaking through decades of enforced silence. I confronted Martin, filed reports. 3 days later, she was committed, declared delusional by colleagues she had trusted. Your father, he arranged everything, she said. And for a fleeting moment, confusion clouded my vision before the horrifying realization struck me. She meant Gregory Collins. He handled the financial transfers, the paperwork for your custody arrangement, called it protective intervention. My pen hovered shakily above my notebook, my hand trembling uncontrollably. The man I had called father for 17 years had personally orchestrated my mother's imprisonment and my own removal from her life. A wave of nausea washed over me. I noticed Camille's right hand sliding stealthily beneath the thin cushion of her chair. With a subtle movement, she extracted a small notebook bound in faded blue fabric, passing it beneath the table to me. I've documented everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. 17 years of treatments, staff rotations, medication protocols. They assume the drugs make me compliant. They never searched hard enough. The journal disappeared into my bag, a tangible piece of my mother's stolen life, as I stared at this woman who had never surrendered, despite the chemical restraints and soul-crushing isolation, who had somehow managed to keep her mind intact through systematic attempts to destroy it. There's a nurse, Camille continued, her eyes holding a flicker of hope. Margot Bell. She left last year but still visits former patients. Officially, she brings cookies and magazines. Unofficially, she knows what they're doing here. I memorized the name instantly, my mind already racing with possibilities. How do I find her? Service entrance. Thursdays at 4 o'clock. Tell her I sent you. Camille's eyes flicked nervously toward the hallway where a medication cart had just appeared. Our time's almost up. I rose, gathering my notebook with hands that trembled despite my attempt to appear composed, the very foundations of my understanding of the world crumbling beneath me. I'll come back, I vowed, my voice thick with emotion. I know, she replied, her expression softening for the first time, a fragile smile gracing her lips. You have my eyes. 3 days later, I stood by the dimly lit service entrance of Rock Creek, my collar turned up against the biting autumn wind that carried the scent of approaching rain. At precisely 4 o'clock, a woman in her late 50s approached, carrying a woven basket covered with a checkered cloth. Margot Bell? I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. She froze, her keys halfway to the lock. A deep weariness etched into her rigid posture. Camille Mercer sent me. The weariness in her eyes instantly transformed into fear, then a weary resignation. I've waited years for someone to ask the right questions, she finally said, her voice low and strained. But not here. Meet me at Lakeside Diner in an hour. At the sticky booth of the Lakeside Diner, over lukewarm burnt coffee, Margot placed a small flash drive beside my saucer. Medication records, unauthorized protocols, security schedules, she murmured, her voice barely carrying over the clatter of dishes and the murmur of other patrons. Your mother wasn't the only one, but she was the one they feared most. My fingers closed around the cool metal of the drive as I slipped it into my pocket, a volatile mix of fear and fury churning beneath my carefully controlled expression. There's more, she said, pushing a thick manila folder across the table. These were harder to access. Inside were pediatric medical records, my medical records, years of preventative treatments administered during routine checkups, experimental compounds disguised as innocent vitamins and vaccines, each form bearing Gregory Collins's damning signature. Understanding crystallized in my veins, sharp and cold as ice. My unexplained childhood illnesses, the monthly doctor visits, the pills I swallowed every morning with breakfast that Jean had insisted were just to keep you healthy, sweetheart. It all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. There are others, Margot said quietly, her gaze filled with a sorrowful understanding. Children of whistleblowers, all placed in protective custody with carefully selected guardians. all receiving specialized medical care. I stared at the pages documenting the chemical alteration of my developing brain, the meticulous monitoring for any signs of maternal instability, patterns, years of being medicated against an inheritance of courage they had labeled as madness. The rage that surged through me was not a fiery inferno, but a cold, precise fury, like a surgeon's scalpel. "This ends now," I told Margot, my voice steady despite the seismic shift occurring within me. All of it, as I walked back to my car. The weight of the truth pressing down on me, I made a silent vow. A vow to the mother who had never stopped fighting, even in the deepest darkness, and to the child I had been, who had never understood the subtle fog in her mind, the dreams that always remained just beyond her grasp. They hadn't just stolen my mother. They had methodically attempted to erase her from me, cell by cell, synapse by synapse. But they had failed. The cracked bathroom mirror at the Pinewood hostel, a jagged line running from one corner to the other, seemed to mock my fractured reality. I traced the fissure with my finger, watching my reflections split into two distinct figures. The compliant person I had been raised to be, and the determined woman I was rapidly becoming. 3 weeks I had lived in this transient place, and I had claimed the cramped corner room as my war room. Behind me, the peeling wallpaper bloomed with a chaotic collage of evidence. Newspaper clippings, photocopied documents, handwritten notes, all interconnected by a tangled web of red string. My makeshift investigation board had devoured nearly every last dollar I had. But money had become a meaningless abstraction when measured against 16 years of stolen time. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the intricate timeline I had painstakingly constructed. Whistleblowers at Stonemer silenced with disturbing regularity. Psychiatric commitments following inconvenient allegations. Children placed in protective custody with guardians who were handsomely compensated. Each damning thread, each painful connection, led back to the Hope Foundation and to Gregory Collins, the man who had called himself my father while coldly cashing checks to ensure my silence. Camille's coded journal lay open on the worn bed beside my ancient laptop. For 7 straight nights, I had toiled, transcribing her meticulous script, painstakingly deciphering the simple substitution cipher she had devised to document the unthinkable. Medication dosages inexplicably increased before board inspections, patients abruptly transferred in the dead of night, staff members who dared to question protocols suddenly reassigned or quietly terminated. The ancient radiator clanked and hissed, pushing tepid, stale air into the cramped room, a pathetic imitation of warmth. I checked my watch. Almost time. Outside the grimy diner window, traffic crawled through the relentless afternoon rain. I had chosen this place specifically, crowded enough to afford a semblance of anonymity, noisy enough to mask hushed conversations, and crucially, 3 exits in case of trouble. The woman across from me, her face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own, stirred her coffee for the 3rd time without taking a sip. "I tried to tell this story 10 years ago," Tessa Monroe said finally. Her eyes, though lined with fatigue, held a sharp, unwavering intelligence. She scanned the damning documents I had placed between us. A former investigative journalist, blacklisted and professionally exiled after daring to pursue corruption allegations in SOG against politically connected figures. Tessa was my 7th attempt at finding the right ally. The previous 6 had believed my story, but had lacked either the courage or the platform to help me fight. What happened, I asked, though my own research had already painted a grim picture. Sudden tax audit, mysterious computer failures that wiped out years of research, sources who suddenly denied ever speaking to me. She tapped a long, elegant finger against the photocopied photo of Dr. Hale. They didn't just discredit me, they erased me professionally. Yet here she was. Something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, but a grim acknowledgement of the shared fight. Some stories never let you go, even after they try to destroy you. With a determined gesture, I pushed Camille's photocopied journal pages toward her. "This time," I said, my voice firm, "we have evidence they can't erase." She studied the fragile pages, her professional mask slipping for just a moment, revealing a raw empathy. Your mother was brilliant. Even heavily medicated, she built a case. We spent the next hour meticulously developing our distribution plan. Multiple outlets, never relying on just one. Independent podcasts focusing on medical ethics and institutional abuses. Former prosecutors now working in patient advocacy. Journalists operating outside the suffocating constraints of traditional media structures. Individual packages, Tessa explained, sketching a diagram on a stained napkin. Each one gets unique documentation with separate access codes. No single target will have everything. A dead man's switch protocol, I added, understanding immediately the gravity of the situation. She nodded, a flicker of something akin to respect crossing her features. We're not just telling the truth, she said, her voice low and resolute. We're making it too loud to bury. I returned to the dilapidated hostel after dark to find Gregory standing in the shabby lobby, his expensive charcoal suit jarringly out of place against the worn furniture. The night manager, a man whose eyes held the weary resignation of someone who had seen too much and cared too little, looked almost apologetic as I approached. Maya, Gregory said, his practiced lawyer voice perfectly modulated despite the barely concealed tension in his jaw. We need to talk. With deliberate slowness, I led him to the dimly lit common room, pointedly choosing a spot directly beneath the flickering security camera in the corner. He noticed my strategic positioning, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Your mother had certain unstable genetics,